interesting. One of the little anecdotes before we get into our official session happens to deal with overall our topic of modernity and technology. I was with a friend whose son and his family had gone to Cyprus for a couple of days. And the father pointed out to the kids that the scenery was so beautiful that it almost looked like a postcard, a gluya. And the kids looked at him and had no idea what that word was, postcard.
Right.
No idea.
Yeah.
Just like in my last years of teaching in Toronto, there was a boy who kept on repeating himself. And in good humor, I said, "You're like a broken record." Not a clue what I was talking about.
Yeah.
And telegram as well. Very interesting. And I would think that it's important that these fossilized words not be forgotten, I think, but interesting. Telegram, anybody know how to say that in Hebrew? No?
Yes.
Ibrah. So that is a word that Eliezer ben Yehuda came up with, and he took two words to create that. So what do you think it is? Mivrach.
Michtav, Barak.
Very good, Nechama. Michtav is letter, Barak is lightning. So isn't that what a telegram was? A letter fast as lightning. Anyway, in today's news happened to be mentioned an Israeli startup company called AIR, A-I-R, which is based in Pardes Chana, and it's been developing a flying car over the last 5 years. It's an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft for individual consumers. And it has a range of 177 kilometers on a single charge, electric, at speeds of 250 kilometers per hour, with a flight time of an hour. And it is really meant to take the place of a car. It has collapsible wings so that it will be easy to park, and it can land anywhere. And they are promising us that this will be available in 2 years. And it's only, if you think about it, it doesn't sound so much, $150,000.
So you're buying one?
If somebody else honks at me tomorrow, yes. Picture the honking up there. Anyway, and the political news of the day is the Prime Minister office just banned anybody demanding a mechitza in the egalitarian section at the wall. It's a terrible scene when people are celebrating simchas, bar bat mitzvah, and what goes on there. So each side has to respect the other. And now they just hope that it will be carried out. The people who probably will still disturb. And one more item. There's a young man, probably his late 20s, mid-late 20s, Tamir Greenberg. There's a musical show here for the last 2 years called Kochav Haba. And last year, people audition, and it's a process of elimination, singing songs, and the winner, to promote his or her future in singing is blessed and gifted with 1 million shekel. So last year, this young man who sings in a jazz way won. Now, very interesting, and we noticed this, that all his songs were in English, either songs that he wrote, or they also can sing songs from other people. He was being interviewed today because he's about to have a very big performance. And I was impressed with the interviewer on Channel 12 News saying, is there a reason that you just sing in English? And he said, no, it just when he developed his taste for music, it was songs that were in English. And that's really why. And who knows, maybe someday he will sing in Hebrew. And the one interviewing him managed to say to him, I hope so. And I thought that was giving him a bit of a stuff, you know? And it was interesting that somebody who was just singing in English did win. But I guess, you know, music is beyond language. Okay, so we're going to continue. And I promised that today we would be discussing some ethical issues, and we will be talking about driving, just usual driving. We're not going to get into the flying car in depth today. Then autonomous cars, touching on driving on Shabbat, and then want to talk about two other issues that give us dilemmas because of modernity. Autonomous weapons and digital albums, photo albums. So let's begin. Perhaps you've heard of the trolley car dilemma. If not, let us consider an ethical thought experiment from 1967, which describes a trolley speeding down the track upon which 5 men are tied. A bystander watching can throw a track switch that will divert the trolley from its current track to a parallel track, thus saving the 5. You're with me? The dilemma arises when the bystander realizes that on the parallel track is tied a single man. So what is the right thing for the bystander to do? What do you think?
Pray to God to resolve the problem.
Okay, that's called a cop-out. Okay, I understand you, but when you talk about dilemmas, it's that it's not going to be easy. And in this case, you have to make a decision, and it's not going to resolve itself simply. So what do you think?
If you make a decision to, it's Michael.
Yes, Michael.
To move over that train and the other one, the guy's going to get killed, you in effect are causing the death of that man. It's your actions doing that. And I know there's something in the back of a lot of minds. Well, 1 death is better than 5. But according to our belief in Judaism, each life is infinite. So you can't use that argument. So
Thank you, Michael.
That's where I am.
Okay, and we'll get back to Jewish thoughts on that. Anybody else?
On the other hand, it says that if you can save 5 lives at the risk of 1 life, then it's better to save the 5 lives.
Where does it say that?
Who says that, Bev?
I read it somewhere.
Somewhere, you know, Seinfeld
Sorry.
always says they say, and he never can tell us who's they. Somebody else? Anybody? Okay, well, there are two camps divided on this issue. There are those who look at the utility of the outcome. And of course, as Bev suggested, wrongly, you would think if you can save more people, the better. And there are those who make their decision based on rules. Don't murder. And you can't play with that. Microchip designer, engineer, rabbi of Mobileye, involved with autonomous cars, Rabbi Dr. Navon, says, though, that the utilitarian approach can be murky territory. How so? What kind of issues could come up? Looking at 1 as opposed to the 5. If you were to say, let's save the 5.
All the 5 are murderers.
A little louder, please.
I should be muted.
Somebody just said something.
No.
She said if all the 5s were murderers.
That's actually an interesting point, which we will get to in a couple of moments. Okay? They deserve to die. Anybody else?
Yes,
Go ahead. Sarah.
if each of the 5 men have families and the one man doesn't have a family, he's not married, no children, he's alone, but the 5 each have children. So you don't want to kill 5 people with families that have 2 to 3 kids each.
Okay, this is what he's talking about. That's an example of it being difficult and it's not so clear cut. But can anybody say when, yes, the 5 as opposed to the 1, if the 1 is what?
A rabbi?
A rabbi? Nah.
I've heard that dilemma phrased as the 1 is not an adult, but a baby.
Okay, Margot. Yeah. You've probably been involved in these exercises. If you had, from way back, a bomb shelter and only 9 people could be in it, and there are 10 people, who do you send out? And you discuss and you debate, and it's very, very difficult. Well, here, what this Navon says, what if the single man is president or prime minister? Should he take precedence over 5 ordinary citizens? And don't get political. Don't say it depends on who he is. Right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, can you expect someone, if he sees who the person is and it's a child of his, you know? These are all kinds of issues that would come up. Now, before we look at a few sources, there's another dilemma. This was 1 versus many. There's also what's called the tunnel dilemma. And look at the difference. And this will take us to what Michael said before about no one individual being more important than another, no matter what position. A driver approaching a single lane tunnel sees a pedestrian in the road. By the way, getting back to what you said about if 5 are murderers, if the person is in the road illegally and shouldn't be there, then whatever happens, happens, by the way. The driver does not have time to brake and is left only with the choice of running over the pedestrian or killing himself by driving into a wall. So this is just 1 versus 1. So what do you think here?
It's terrible.
Yes, but
I
it's
think he has to-
reality.
I think he
Stop
has
the
to save his
car.
life.
Abe?
I think he has to save his own life first.
Okay,
Well, he
All right.
probably has passengers on the bus or the train. No,
no, we're talking in this case, it's somebody driving. It's not
Oh.
on a track.
Oh.
Okay, because that's important, because it makes it clearer that it's just one as opposed to another. So you don't have that same variable of should you be saving more than the one. Okay, so this is the way Navon presents it. If the street is perfectly straight and the driver is holding the steering wheel straight, this is considered passive killing, because that's where he was headed. And the driver would not be, as Abe said, obligated to actively take his own life. If, on the other hand, the street is curved such that the driver must actively turn the wheel into the curve, this would be considered active killing. So the driver then would have to give his own life. Okay, I'm gonna share the screen. Margot, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this is actually a problem that programmers of autonomous cars have, because
Go ahead, go to the end of my class, Margot, take it away.
well, I mean, because the autonomous car, or the even ones that we drive ourselves that have these braking systems, would be programmed to avoid an object. So it would swerve, thereby going into the wall and killing the driver. And you can't program it somehow to override or avoid both. And you might have to have the driver override the car, and therefore it's not passive.
Yeah, and that is a very big issue. I've begun with just human beings driving, and there are these issues. And then there will be a bit of a different problem, as you just said, because it is pre-programmed. And we'll look at that in more depth. But let's just briefly look at a few of our sources that shed light on this thinking of one or the many.
Ed?
So,
Yeah, can I get back to you a bit later? All right, thanks.
Elliot, please mute yourself. I think it's Elliot. Okay. The governor of a city said, taken from the Talmud, go and kill Plony. And Plony is a word used for anybody. It's not a real name. Go and kill Plony, or you will be killed. What do you do? What would you do before reading? Okay. That's one of the 3 transgressions that you're not allowed to do. Why do you have a right to kill that other person unless it's self-defense? The Talmud responds that one must give his or her own life rather than commit murder. For in what way do you see that your blood is redder than his? Perhaps his blood is redder. Okay, now getting back to this question of passive or active, now this is going to sound horrific, the next text. That being said, the Tosafot in the Talmud note that self-sacrifice is demanded only when one will actively murder another, making that turn. However, they explain, if the governor said, allow me to throw you unto a baby, such that you will end up crushing him to death, sorry, one would not be demanded to sacrifice one's own life, for one did not do an action. It's an awful example because of what we're picturing. But the essence is that you have not consciously, actively committed the murder. Now, I'm sure we are all familiar with this next text, just for us to see what the thinkers, very fascinating to me. There's a phenomenon here called Torah Umada. People who are experts in Torah and science, Mada. And they are at these institutions of modern technology thinking about all of the issues that evolve with each invention, or as they invent, like this Navon. So two people are walking in the desert, and only one of them has a canteen of water. If both drink, they will both die. And there's no copping out and saying, well, maybe if they share. No, it's clear one of them will. There's only enough for one of them to drink. But if only one drinks, he can reach civilization. Ben Petora taught it is better that both should drink and die, rather than one should behold his companion's death. So it was until Rabbi Akiva came and taught that your brother from Leviticus may live with you, help him so he may live with you, means your life takes precedence over his life. Because the beginning of the verse in Leviticus is, whether it's give him tzedakah, but you're making sure he lives, but the words that are very important is with you. You don't have to help him if it's going to kill you. Thoughts. Now, this could also be murky. What if it's a mother and her child walking in the desert? Now, they assume that it's the person who owns the bottle of water. Okay, but obviously, there are going to be situations that it's not going to be black and white. And now, our last source, a group of people were traveling, and marauders chanced upon them, saying, hand over one of your group, or we will kill you all. Even if all will be killed, they may not hand over one soul. Which brings us back to this point. How do you decide that 5 lives are more valuable than 1 life? Especially when we say, if you save 1 life, it's as if you saved a whole world. So people involved here, and I'm sure there are other thinkers outside of Israel, not even necessarily Jewish, but are thinking about all these kinds of issues, and based on philosophies and sources from a long time ago. And I've said this before, that we see in the Baba Metzia example in the desert, that 2 rabbis, highly esteemed rabbis, have a difference of opinion. The Talmud might say, we follow such and such a rabbi, but it always gives, and that's why it's so much longer than the concise code of Jewish law. But we see the other opinion. And part of that is not just giving respect, but who knows that maybe under another circumstance, in a different period of time, the other opinion will be valid. Very, very important. Okay, now, as Margot said, what about autonomous cars? Now, for those of us who aren't aware of what an autonomous car, very briefly, An autonomous car is a vehicle capable of sensing its environment and operating without human involvement. A human passenger, and that's meant to be the beauty of it for a few reasons. A human passenger is not required to take control of the vehicle at any time, nor is a human passenger required to be present in the vehicle at all. An autonomous car can go anywhere a traditional car goes and do everything that an experienced human driver does. Autonomous cars create and maintain a map of their surroundings based on a variety of sensors situated in different parts of the vehicle. Radar sensors monitor the position of nearby vehicles. Video cameras detect traffic lights, read road signs, track other vehicles, and look for pedestrians. Sophisticated software then processes all this sensory input, plots a path, important to our discussion, and sends instructions to the car's actuators, which control acceleration, braking, and steering. Hard-coded rules, obstacle avoidance algorithms, predictive modeling, and object recognition help the software follow traffic rules and navigate obstacles. Okay, so we all understand that down to the very last detail, right? Still incredible to me, but they're saying it will be safer than human drivers. What are some of the benefits? The scenarios for convenience and quality of life improvements are limitless. Elderly, physically disabled would have independence. They don't have to wait for their child to come and pick them up. If your kids were at summer camp and forgot their bathing suits and toothbrushes, the car could bring them the missing items. You could even send your dog to a veterinary appointment. But the real promise of autonomous cars is the potential for dramatically lowering CO2 emissions. Roughly, you see that huge number, 1,170,000 lives around the world are lost every year due to human errors while driving. And anywhere from 20 to 50 million people are injured annually. Judaism places a particular high religious value on preemptive accident avoidance. And here we are being encouraged to take this autonomous car and go with it. Because of this, there is a positive commandment from Dvarim, guard your lives very much, which most commentators read as an obligation to stay safe. Leviticus commands us not to stand by our fellow's blood, and the Talmud in Shabbat 54b notes that those who have the capacity to eliminate a wrong and do not do so bear the responsibility for its consequences. It's making this autonomous car a mitzvah. Driverless cars can eliminate the vast majority of those deaths and those injuries, which serves the Jewish value of tikkun olam, making the world a better and safer place. And just as an aside, the writer says Israel, from a national security perspective, the advancement of driverless cars will immediately help in the struggle to reduce, interestingly, Israeli reliance on foreign oil. In 2013, the legislature set a goal of reducing Israel's oil dependence in the transportation sector to 40% by 2025. As of May 2016, a full 99% of Israel's oil was still coming from foreign suppliers. Switching over to autonomous vehicles would not only hasten the goal by bringing us deeper into the age of the electric car, but it would also make that shift away from dependency exponentially faster, reducing traffic up to 500%. Saving money and reducing reliance on Israel's enemies would be enough to explain the Israeli interest in driverless cars. And this is written by a Nathan Posner, who is working on this project actually at Emory in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, we come back to what Margot brought up earlier, decision-making. Okay, what is going to be a key difference between whether you have a human being there that hopefully is alert and is looking and might not have more than a second to make a decision, and a difficult decision, and autonomous vehicle. Navon goes on to say, the autonomous vehicle, however, different conclusions can be drawn, and basically because it is pre-programmed. Now, what are you going to do? Are you going to be able to go in to a car dealer and say before you buy it, I'm buying it on condition that you program it according to my ethics, how I would like it to be programmed? Are you going to be able to do that? Regarding the trolley problem, an argument can be made for always saving the many, since there is no hariga biyadayim, because there isn't going to be any killing through your hands. Regarding the tunnel problem, an argument can be made to always save the passengers by programming the car to simply abide by the rules of the road. These interpersonal level arguments are trumped by approaching the dilemmas from the societal level, which demands extra precaution in safeguarding public welfare and would consequently call for the autonomous vehicle to be programmed to always provide the utmost safety for public at large, i.e. program according to utilitarianism. Anybody want to respond to this?
What about those automated cars that have malfunctioned and there have been deaths as a result of them in the early testing process?
So what about them? Nothing is perfect. Now, what becomes an issue with that? Let's say there is a death with the autonomous car. What's going to be an issue that's going to come up, an ethical issue based on that? Who's responsible? Who's responsible for that? Is it, well, what are our possibilities? Is it the manufacturer? Usually, you know, you can blame a manufacturer for a product that's gone wrong. But here, can you do that? Or is it the driver? These are questions. Anybody else? What do you feel about this? I don't want to read everything that's here, but again, there are some that are cynical that feel the manufacturer just has to program, wants to do it in the simplest way, and is not going to be thinking about varieties of way.
Who's
to
responsible
program.
now? Who's responsible now in the current world situation? And what would the changes be?
Well, sometimes it's the manufacturer, sometimes it's the driver, and sometimes it's the insurance. But because of the situation being so different, and that the driver isn't the human being, it raises questions. And by the way, these are still questions that are being worked on. I'm not going to be giving you a definitive answer. I'm not. Look at the individual owner. The driver in self-driving cars will have theoretically no role in the decision-making process. And you can't just say, well, if he's in the car, you know, and enjoying the ride, reading or whatever, that he can suddenly override the car's decision. No. Isn't it
Can I
too
make
much?
a comment, Bracha?
Yes.
In terms of a human driver, you have not talked about the speed at which a decision would have to be made, even if somebody knows all the halachas and the details and so forth. And what about the emotional impact? People may respond just based on some sort of emotional component that overrides everything.
So what are you trying to say?
I'm saying emotions are certainly a factor in how one behaves. And
Of
if there's a
course.
time element involved, a matter of seconds, how would one know how to make the most sound decision at that time?
Well, if you're talking about when a human being is in the driver's seat, then of course a person, it's an impossible situation. Because
So if they make-
emotions and nerves are involved. But that's very different from when you've got the autonomous car. Now, the question comes down to, let's go back to what I was reading. Isn't it too much to ask a driver to potentially face full liability for the moral decisions of the car? Holding the driver responsible creates two major issues that could cripple the self-driving car from ever taking hold. Because first, a strict liability standard would create a strong disincentive against individuals adopting the new technology. Because why would you want to be liable if you're not the driver? How many people would consistently agree to be at the mercy of liability that they do not control, especially when said liability could potentially deal with significant damages to life or property? In a poll by the Open Road Ethics Initiative, 44% of respondents said the passengers in the vehicle should control how it responds in ethical situations. But can you see that happening? As I said before, that you're going to be able to go in, who knows? Maybe. But what is going to be difficult about that? If everybody gets to go in and make a request, we know that people have different priorities. And so this Nick Belay, a lawyer, suggests the following. Who's going to be responsible? The key to accomplishing these goals will be consistency in behavior. So the legislature needs to determine a consistent code by which all self-driving cars abide. The idea being that uniformity will relieve the manufacturer and consumer from large lawsuits contingent on how their one car in particular behaved. In line with this reasoning, the legislature should determine that all self-driving cars must act in the interest of their passengers over anything else. The idea of self-preservation is both ethically neutral and socially accepted. So, anybody want to talk to any of this before we move on? Because remember,
This is the predicament of the canteen in the desert. It seems to me that's exactly what it is.
okay, Stephen, okay. And do you agree with Rabbi Akiva's opinion?
Where's Rabbi Akiva's?
Rabbi
Did you
Akiva said one should drink because you should have at least one survive.
Yes, and the one that should drink is the one who possesses the canteen. Your own self-preservation is above anyone else's, including your 17-year-old grandson. It's a very difficult concept to understand, but if you don't love yourself, if you don't protect yourself first as the head of your family unit, you must come first. It's not selfishness. It's a fact that if you don't survive, nobody can survive.
Okay, you're raising, they use this also as an exercise. If you see, when you get on a plane, and some people, when they first see it, they're bothered when they see that the adult is putting on the oxygen mask before the child. And it's precisely for the reason that you just said. But I don't know if everyone here would agree with what you just said. Does it depend on how old the grandparent is and the son has a future? Or, Sarah said before, if you have 5 fathers, and what's going to happen to the family without? Very, very difficult. So maybe in saying that you preserve yourself, that makes it easier because you're following the law. But is everybody going to follow the law in that kind of case? And isn't it too difficult for us to predict how any of us would act in such a situation? Very, very complicated. In a class like this, we're just throwing these ideas, and it's fascinating to follow. And this is something that a couple of years ago, I never would have found myself looking into. But it's fascinating. I think it's scary. But what I love most, obviously, is relating to ancient texts that still have something to say about this. And on many of these issues, for instance, can you drive an autonomous car on Shabbat? And I don't want to spend too much time on that because I want to be sure to get to the other two topics, which I think is more interesting. But you don't get a set answer. Even within the Orthodox group, there's a variety of opinions. But from what I have studied, it seems to me that the bottom line is that even those who say, if not now, but it could be that a car will halachically be something I can get into and keep Shabbat, that's not necessarily really the issue. The more important issue is, as I said last week, it's not that you're doing melacha, one of the 39 types of work, but it's you want to make a change from what you do during the week. And I'm just going to summarize the text that I have because I want to get to the other. When the conservative movement decided to say driving to shul, but only to shul is okay, they did that because they felt it was very, very important for people to come to shul. Once they saw that people then were saying, so I'll drive to the mall, many of them took that back. Now, of course, it's different there than in Israel. The Masorti movement here did not go along with that. But here, people live closer to so many different shuls. But I repeat, without getting into the technical details, that a car or a bus, that if it's running and it stops, not just for you, but for mostly non-Jews, these are all kinds of things that come up, then yeah, maybe you can get on it. If it's especially in a non-Jewish neighborhood, so it's clear it's not for you. But there are reasons that you wouldn't do that, even if you're not doing melacha, for the sense of shinui, of a difference between the weekday and Shabbat and Yom Tov. And there are those who feel going to shul is better, even if you're driving, than staying at home. And others who don't. So I am actually skipping over this. If anybody is interested, you can tell Gail and I will happily email it to you. I want to now get to AWS, Autonomous Weapons Systems. These are robots of various forms that have the technical capacity by means of advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, facial recognition, GPS, to approach targets, identify them, and then harm or destroy them without human involvement. Again, does this remind you of any ancient times, weapons in ancient times? that the principle is very similar? I don't expect that anybody here will actually remember, but just from what you've read. What is something that was used, two objects in ancient times to fight?
Trojan horse.
A bow and arrow. And so what's common between the bow and arrow and some of the weapons today? The distancing of the weapon from the soldier and the potential for non-discriminate shooting. Now, armies today already use automatic weapons, land and naval mines, hand grenades, cannons, and bombs. But the difference between these and autonomous weapon systems is, as artificial intelligence inventions possess proactive capacity to decide whom to kill anytime and anywhere. So what you don't have is the human element, as it says here. In Bonnie Lynn Deschertes, who's very involved with human rights and desperately against these autonomous weapons, she writes in Losing Humanity, the case against killer robots. Its main argument is that robots are by definition unable to be adequately subject to ethical considerations nor capable of emotional care. Facing present-day attempts to represent humane reasoning in algorithm form, there is a need to inquire whether the non-humane computerized forms of decision-making are a worthy substitute to humane moral discretion. Now, a few thinkers have noted that there is very little, not just halachic, but ethical discussion in Chutz La'aretz, the diaspora, or in Israel about these weapons. And one person who has spoken about it is Rabbi Daniel Nevins of the conservative movement, who is on the law and halacha committee, and said the following: human approval must be required for the use of force that will be lethal to other humans. This may require structures such as human operators to authorize lethal defensive attacks, and humans must always be in control of preempted uses of force. Jewish law is exceptionally cautious about the evidentiary standards required to justify killing a human. Autonomous weapon systems must not use lethal force without human direction. Now, need it be said that the reason for even thinking of such weapons is to try to save lives, that they shouldn't have to be out there. Anybody? Do you agree with Nevins? That there's got to be, in situations like this, how can you just let it be up to a machine? How can you not have?
Up until the present time, unless if somebody contradicts me, is there evidence of autonomous sentient robotics? Autonomous sentient robots. Is there such a thing? Any scientists here?
Not me.
I don't think there are any sentient robots yet.
Yeah,
The other
I-
problem is if you have a short circuit, when you have a problem, all the time, when you've got airplanes flying and there are issues when, sometimes it's on autopilot or sometimes it's not. And then when the pilot can't do anything to change it, so it's a very, very dangerous situation.
very dangerous. I want to just add that in my reading for this, I came across, I wasn't aware of this, that back in 9/11, do you remember that there was a plane that I think ended up in
Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, and Dick Cheney, and we don't know if he had the approval of his president, but he had given an order to shoot down the plane with passengers to save the many people on the ground. Now, it did not happen, but that takes us back to what we were talking about before, and Bev just reminded me of that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, now just something, again, an example of how our thinkers look to our texts as we think about these issues. So we read about our favorite king, Melech David, and remember what this special king had done, the same person who gives us beautiful music and Tehillim, Psalms. We know the awful thing he did with Bathsheba's husband, had him killed so that he could be with her, etc., etc. And David said to the messenger, "So shall you say to Joab, let not this thing displease you," because he's reported that Uriah has been killed. "For the sword devours many times this number. Strengthen your battle against the city and destroy it and encourage him." Two thinkers, Moshe Halbertal and Stephen Holmes, pay close attention to the wording. And they say the following: David deployed a striking metaphor that inadvertently illuminates how rulers routinely strive to manipulate the public mind in an effort to dissociate themselves from the political violence they instigate and direct the distribution of violence along a chain of agents culminates in the perception that the instruments of violence have an autonomous agency of their own. And they say that all based on the words in the pasuk, the verse, "For the sword devours," as if I'm not guilty, it's the sword that did it. Interesting. In them referring and talking about these autonomous weapons. And now, who's discussing this is a Jewish philosopher at Ben Gurion University, Nadav Berman, who says, this carries a lesson in regard to the targeting of enemy combatants by AWS-2. On the one hand, war is the place where you defeat your enemy by sophistication and deception. On the other hand, the reader of Samuel 2, verse 11, is reminded that remoteness from the battlefield does not excuse one from responsibility for the chain of events that one has set in motion. When you hire the hit guy, it's not just him to blame. And then you know that the Navi, the prophet Natan, wants to rebuke David after all of this has happened with Bathsheba and Uriah, and he speaks to him and creates a bit of a fable. And David realizes that he's talking about him. And Natan said to David, you are the man, after he's given him this story. So says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anointed you as king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Shaul. So Berman goes on and says, which halachic ethical conclusion could be made about AWS based on this biblical episode? As mentioned earlier, a complete outsourcing of military activity to robots will practically put humans and human agency out of the loop. David is indeed taking human agency seriously when he realizes, even if he tries to bypass and manipulate it, what happens when this threshold is surpassed is a speculation that should be examined carefully on the social, political level. So do we agree with the activist Bonnie Descherty, or does someone see here value in the autonomous weapons? Anybody want to comment? Very interesting, very interesting. But this sense, the more and more we talk about this over the last couple of weeks, I find it very frightening, trying to take human beings out of the equation. In certain situations, but in these kinds of situations, I don't know. I don't know. I want to, because I think it's very important, this last situation. What do you see in this photo? And I mean in the entire photo. Anybody?
Modes of transportation.
Okay, you said that before. I was going to say, I don't even mean specifics of each photo. But that was quick. Okay. Overall, what do you see? What's happening in this picture?
People are moving. People are going places, and there seem to be more than one.
Okay, it's just a coincidence that the picture has transportation. That has nothing to do with why I brought this. This is a totally different area. But what more do you see beyond each picture?
Someone is reminiscing. They're looking at past activities.
Okay, you see somebody comfortable lying down. Go on.
Reminiscing. They're looking at old photos, family photos, probably.
Is that Mel who's
Yes.
saying that? Good
Yes.
to see you. Okay. Yeah, you would notice that. You're a photographer, videographer. Yes. Okay.
I also have a picture of me on a horse like that.
Okay. So what we see is somebody literally holding an album. What do we call it? A hard copy of pictures. So I want to ask you, are you still into these albums and being able to hold a concrete picture? Or have any of you taken to the digitized photos and enough for you to have them on your phone or your computer? Anyone?
Yeah.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing both. I got old pictures and I got computerized pictures.
Okay. Okay. Now, what else is going on in today's world with memories of people and who are no longer with us? Are we just holding on to photos? Anybody know what else is going on in the digital world?
Well, there are videos.
Okay, there are videos beyond videos. You and I can do videos. What I'm talking about isn't something that I'm capable of creating, but it is being created. And I'm going to give you a hint. I
I
think,
just saw something, Bracha, of holograms.
beautiful.
survivors
Absolutely.
are doing holograms, and Max Eisen, may he rest in peace, just passed
Yep.
away, but his hologram is going to live for a long time.
Okay, now you're going to make me feel bad because Max Eisen, a wonderful soul. But that's what I was just going to say, that I remember a couple of years before leaving Toronto, it's almost 4 years, going to an evening, it might have been at the Spadina JCC, I'm not sure, it doesn't matter. And there was a hologram, a way of keeping the memories alive or communicating with a survivor who's no longer with us. Now, without wanting to take away, and it's never, it's all bad or it's all good, but just for us to listen to what this Michael Wass, who is based in Israel, and he's a heritage preservationist, an archaeologist, and he specializes in historical archaeology and digital technologies. But he's wary of some of the technology and expresses something that I find very interesting. And I think it's not an either or, as Mel just said. You can have both, but pay attention to what he expresses here about his fears of just going digital. And I want to read it. I think it's beautifully said. Despite the incredible advances, and they are incredible, these digital technologies have given us, there is also a darker side that threatens to make our ancestors nothing more than marionettes. Now, you'll be able to respond and say whether you agree, don't agree. Nothing more than marionettes dancing on a computer screen. In recent years, several companies have started to provide services that enable them to record individuals and use artificial intelligence to develop an avatar that can interact with users and learn to converse. Other companies have used AI to make a photograph into an animated video that follows a pre-programmed series of movements, making it seem as if the person is in front of you and glancing all around as they wait for their portrait to be taken. When one looks at a single such animation in isolation, it may seem lifelike. However, Wass says, if you consider the infinite number of photographs, each of which repeats the same mindless series of mechanical movements, it becomes deeply unnerving. When these programs use artificial intelligence to assign a procedurally generated voice to an ancestor, it becomes even more disturbing. The late historian David Lowenthal writes in his 2005 article, Natural and Cultural Heritage, says that heritage denotes everything we suppose has been handed down to us from the past. The very act of holding family heirlooms, such as the album we just saw, in your hands is itself an heirloom, an act of which has been passed down from generation to generation. And although we may never have met the people in the albums, they played a significant role in the lives of our ancestors and in their world. In these images, we see the faces of our ancestors and their families long after they have passed into dust. And we discover anew in our time little bits and pieces of their world through their photos, albums, diaries, manuscripts, and documents. For me, heritage is about how we engage with the past and how we tell the stories of those who came before us to the generations yet to come. The past is never dead. It lives on in all of us. There is something vital and timeless about this idea, in that even after our ancestors and loved ones are gone, we are able to keep their memories and stories alive by passing them on to the next generation. So it should come as no surprise that I believe that using AI to recreate their voices, alter their images, or recreate their thoughts would serve instead to remove their souls and voices and replace them with cheap imitations. So, what do we think?
This really speaks to me because as I listen to you, I've been scrapbooking. That's my new hobby in retirement. And my father just passed away in April, and I had made him a whole scrapbook, including his documents. And it is a legacy for the next generations. You know, even my sons were, learning about him through all this. And just today, I don't know if you remember Dater's Dairy.
Sure.
Yeah,
But didn't
so
that
I was
close?
Sherry Dater. And just today, my cousin, he's, is cleaning out his mother's condo after she moved into a retirement home. And he just posted like these black and white photos of Dater's Dairy and the creamery in Kensington and actually making the cheese in the dairy. And, you see the cars, the old cars, that gives you the full context. Whereas if it's just like a person with an animated voice, you would lose all that contextual information.
Yeah, that's what he's saying. Stephen, thank you. Yeah,
So,
Stephen?
when you look at those photographs that you posted a few moments ago, what you see is a memory of what was reality at that time. You can read into the photograph what took place, but it's captured at a moment in time. With this artificial intelligence, it opens up a whole new realm of manipulation of reality. And this is what I object to. You can change the reality to suit your own narrative.
Well, if you raise that, then that's another point of, again, if it can be supervised in a certain way to not let that happen. But can you? Anyone else? Thank you, Stephen.
Can I make a comment? There's some outfit in New England, Terrorism Foundation, I think it's called, headed by some Jewish person who, if you send in a profile of someone important to you after you've passed away, through artificial intelligence, they even created a bust to the person. You can look at it, look at grandma and ask her questions, and she'll respond with artificial voice based on her profile that you send in about her. So they ask you certain basic questions about a person's beliefs, behaviors, etc. And from that, they compute this computerized system to so that you can interact with it. Sounds a little creepy, but who knows?
Now, why would that be something that would be sought after? My first thought is that young people today become interested in things through the medium. Otherwise, what would be the point of that?
They're thinking that if they're not quite sure how grandma would respond to something, they ask grandma a question through this profile, and this digitized voice comes back and gives you grandma's opinion. Terrorism Foundation in New England somewhere. Creepy, it sounds creepy, but who knows?
Who knows? That's true.
Wouldn't you like to speak to your grandma this way, your great grandma?
Oh
but
my God. Let's not go there.
Send in the profile.
It sounds almost like the witchcraft and, what we're forbidden to do from the Torah, in terms of trying to reach the dead after they've gone.
So what are the limits? I wonder what the halachas on this sort of thing might be. When have we gone beyond where you're supposed to go?
Well, I think our Haggadah gives us the limits. It continues to tell us, "V'higadata," you should orally tell your child. And that's the best way, because if child sees that it's important to you enough to you to talk about your grandmother, and Miriam and Moshe, that should be what will make somebody listen. I don't
Sounds
know.
like you're all for artificial intelligence cars, but not so much for artificial intelligence grandma.
No, I can see that probably the car will happen. But you're right, with the grandma, no. But these issues have to be worked out. I mean, you know, you're going to let a human being be replaced in decision making? That's very painful. That's very painful. Okay.
Bracha, it reminds me of your father's sermons. I grew up with at Beth Tikvah, and what would I rather listen to? An actual recording, like an actual sound of his recording of his actual sermon, or like some computer like telling me what he would say on a certain topic? That's not reality, right? It's not his own soul. I'd rather hear from him, you know, through a recording than
Well,
what a
I'll tell you
computer thinks
what.
he would say.
I'll go on the terrace and site and I'll see if I can conjure. All right. No, that's a perfect example. But you can, sometimes when I read something that he's written, I hear him speaking. Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Sometimes when I hear myself speaking, I hear him. I can't.
Bracha, I want to say something.
Margot.
I want to say something in defense of the holograms.
No, I know, I felt terrible. Go ahead.
Because I saw a CBC program where Eisen was interviewed, and the hologram is a film of him, which has been digitized to make this three-dimensional hologram, and it uses his voice. And it's apparently programmed so that if it goes into a school, for example, the children can ask questions as if he were still there, and he will give appropriate responses. And I remember seeing in this interview his absolute delight that he would continue this work that he'd been doing for so many years. It's hard to think of him in the past tense. That would continue for a very long time. And
absolutely. And I'm glad that he had the opportunity to see that.
Yeah. You know, that's an example where I think the technology is not really manipulative.
Right, and if you're saying it's his voice, etc., and nothing, yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Margot. Yeah.
Are these things we're discussing more of a controversial area than the Shabbos elevator or the Shabbos microphone in shuls? Perhaps they're more complex.
I think they're more complex and more interesting, actually. And I wanted to be sure to get to these so that we did not put too much time. But the comment that I made, it's really true that most say that they're more concerned about what driving in the car will lead to. Just as in the time of the Talmud, when people were riding on horses, the horse that Mel was on, you don't go back that far. Anyway, one of their concerns was that somebody would be on the horse on Shabbat and he'd reach up and pick an apple off a tree, and that would have been wrong. Yes? Okay, it's been wonderful as always. Have a good week and stay cool, drink, and Shabbat Shalom.